So tonight we are talking about relationship grazing with Ivan Thrane, who is our host for the evening. And Ivan and Shia Thrane are based out of Red Lodge, Montana. After being gifted a piece of family ranch land in Red Lodge from his grandmother in 2008, Ivan had choose how to manage the land and the invasive weeds that came with it. He chose goats as a way to relate to the land, starting with 9 goats and eventually building to a grazing herd of 1,000 head. Ivan and Chia quickly learned the power of grazing, animal impact, and relationships between plants, animals, and humans. Their vision has evolved from a livestock production model and a goal to eliminate invasive weeds to a model that values relationships. Relationship grazing, as they call it, is a way to strengthen the often invisible ties between humans and the ecosystems of which we are living members. Since starting Healthy Meadows LLC in 2010, Ivan and Chia have learned that building strong relationships takes time and commitment, but also requires listening and being open to feedback from the animals, plants, and soil that doesn't always match how modern human goals. They are guided by the question, how can we become better caretakers of ourselves, the land, and the community of life that we are active members in? And with that, I'll hand it over to Ivan.
Well, thanks, Coulter. You kind of did my whole synopsis. Yeah, I think some of you have heard our story already, and I think the big thing that the Coulter brought up that we've been really trying to understand is relationships. And growing up, I was in school, we're in our families, we're taught a lot about how do we relate with our siblings, how do we relate with our parents, how do we relate with our grandparents if we have that relationship. And for me, I feel really blessed. I had a really strong relationship with my grandmother growing up, and that really instilled in me this this image in my head of what is also possible, and how we choose to relate with these elders that are all around us, and these elders that I'm talking about are plants. Whether they're trees, whether they're annuals or perennials, and in our county, as in I think in every county in Montana, there's weed districts, and every weed district mandates that they have a long list of noxious weeds, and they mandate that if you have these certain plants on your land, you have to combat them in some form of war mentality. So whether it's typically herbicides, maybe hand pulling for smaller areas, and for us we and there's insects, and then for us we chose to try to use goats, because what we quickly learned is goats love most of these so-called noxious weeds that are throughout the state, and with that what we also learned is just like your relationship with your grandparents or with anybody in your life, there's moments where you need rest. You need a break. And early on we were really thinking that, okay, we have to graze these weeds really hard, and just all through the growing season we just need to graze them hard and hammer them. And what we learned was like that actually, yes, there's periods where maybe you have a real intense graze, and there's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of communication going on between the plants and the animals. But then sometimes maybe the land needs 1 or 2 years of rest. And historically we've heard in some areas, like with the bison, there'd be rest periods of 4 to 7 years where those herds wouldn't come through an area. I'm bringing this all back to that relationship part. So over time we've started to stop viewing these plants as enemies, as noxious weeds, and we've tried to start viewing them as relatives, and as part of a community that we are part of. And when you start viewing all these plants, and you start viewing the land as your family, it really affects the choices you want to make on how you interact with them. And so over time, we've kind of learned that goats are just one tool to relate to these plants and the land, but they're not the they're not the only tool. I mean, some people like using compost tea. Some people like using seeds. Some people like using cows. Some people just like to listen and sing. And what I'm bringing up here is there's no one way to relate to the land. There's many different ways, and I think it really comes down to what you consider part of your family, what you consider the tools that you have access to. And so currently, we still graze weeds for a living, but we've found some of our clients, some of the properties that we work with, we've been grazing for 10 years now. And again, we've learned that it's become more than just the weeds. It's become the relationship with the landowners. It's become a relationship with all the plants that are growing there. And a lot of times, we might have a goal of, well, we want to transition to more perennial grasses, or we want to transition to more perennial forbs. When the land may have a whole different plan, and that's been the humbling part in a relationship with the land is the land doesn't always want to meet our expectations, but the land's willing to work with us and teach us a lot, and that's ultimately what we've kind of come down to, is that it's a constant learning process, no matter how you relate to these plants. And so some of the questions that I was thinking about, just for all of us, what are tools that we have available to change our mentality of viewing the Montana landscape as a potential war zone. Because right now there's a strong pedagogy, there's a strong mindset that we have to control the land in some way, and we have to make the land create certain plant community that we perceive as right and correct. And so, one of the questions I kind of want to pose to the group is how can we how can we change that mindset to relate to the land as a community, as something they want to see as healthy and vibrant. And are there simple acts as just taking a moment in the morning and having a sit spot, where you sit out on the land and just kind of listen or meditate, or do we need do we need a whole louder approaches? So yeah, I guess since this is kind of just a dinner hangout, I just want to ask, like, how do people, people in this group, like, what are practices that you do to relate to the land?
I don't mind jumping in. Yeah, so we just moved up to our farm this last Christmas Eve. So we've been here just 11 months now. And so, but we did end up closing on it in September of last year. So I spent some time in the fall up here. But what I liked to do is originally just get out, find a nice spot in the sun and sit down and just, close my eyes and listen and kind of hang out in the space. And then I would go and find all of the plants that I didn't like that we had. We had a couple patches of leafy spurge and just go break them down. I didn't like dig them up or anything. I just broke them in half before they went to flower. And just kind of snapping them off to try to prevent them from doing much. And this year we didn't have very much of it. I don't know if that's going to work long term, but it worked thus far. And then this year we got honeybees. And so now I like to go sit out by the beehives and kind of watch where they're going and watch what they're up to and see kind of what they like in the areas that they're flying to and the areas that they're avoiding. We spread our beehives out very far. So the 3 beehives, they're spread kind of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So they're not right next to each other. And so I'll go kind of wander around and see what the bees are up to. And they kind of are telling me a little bit more about what is good and what is bad and when stuff is good. Like in the early spring, they were going wild on the ridges. They loved our ridges because they were just full of wildflowers. And then the wildflowers all dried out and died really quick because they're the ridges. So they dried out fast. And then they were down in the valleys and especially in the lower part. And then, just kind of moving around and you could kind of see what they were up to. And so that's sort of how I started this year with relating to the land, but we haven't done a ton yet because we've been trying to get our housing situation sorted, but that was what we've done. And I have a couple spots that I like to go and just sit and be quiet. And one is the absolute highest corner of our property. And then one is down in the choke cherries. And then one's right next to the beehives. So anyways, that's what I've been relating with our land and trying to identify the plants that have been popping up since we did like excavate to put a road in, and trying to figure out what are the plants I need to keep an eye on and what are the ones that I don't really care too much about. So.
No, that's awesome, Coulter. I think that's kind of what I was looking for is just, I think we all have our own personal story of how we choose or choose not to relate to wherever we live. And yeah, it gives me hope that, hearing you observing the honeybees, because something we really come to respect is, during a drought year, and you say, you mentioned the slope area, but during like a drought year, some of these, like let's say knapweed, or you mentioned leafy spurge, some of these non-native plants actually are the main support for pollinators in certain areas. Dandelions, I really admire in the early spring, like dandelions are one of the first flowers blooming to support honeybees. So yeah, that to me is a huge part of it, is just how, just taking time to observe. And then, listen to the land that you're working with, and then how can you take your energy to help strengthen that, that connection. So anybody else that, I was thinking Patty with the gardening.
Yeah, I could chime in, I guess. I got a current story with the greenhouse. It's a regenerative greenhouse, right? And this is, I believe, our 4th growing season in there. So every year has been different, and we're progressively making, or the soil and the plants, I guess, are progressively making changes. we humans haven't done much, but I have noticed that especially this year had all kinds of alfalfa and clovers show up. And this is an inside greenhouse, doesn't really have a lot of exposure from outside. We do have native pollinators coming in there, and one day out of 100 there might be a bird in there, but so there isn't seed really coming from someplace. And so I'm just like, wow, the legumes want to grow here. So what is that telling me? Is it telling me we need more nitrogen, or is it telling me that our soil microbes have changed the environment and now we're growing a perennial plant? And so it's just really interesting. And now the dilemma is to figure out, well, what do we do? Do we just let it go and turn into an alfalfa field and then we just grow an upper canopy, which kind of is what happened this year. We were already growing an upper canopy, so we didn't do any disturbance too much. Other places where I had a lower canopy, like I had carrots under 3 different beds, and those carrots were telling me a lot too. It was amazing that some of them were ripe early and big and gorgeous, and some of them are still in the ground and we're going to probably be eating them at Christmas time if it doesn't get any colder than this. And so it's just always fun, and just pay attention to what's going on. One major thing I've seen is as the plant health increased, our pests decreased. But what do you think decreased with the pests? So all those beneficials numbers decreased too, because there wasn't anything there for them to support on. So very interesting stuff. Yeah, just paying attention what's going on. I'm not really interfering, I guess, just learning.
Yeah, Patty really came down to our place, and she really inspired us with the concept of mulching. We also have we grow potatoes and garlic and beans, and again, it's amazing. Just even a garden is like a microcosm of how we relate to a larger landscape. Do we douse our garden with chemicals, or do we hand pull our weeds, or do we try to plant things that have relationships with each other that are beneficial? And I think what's so exciting is there's no one way to do it. It's just finding the tools that work for your context. But yeah, there are other people that I'm sure there's some hikers, or just how are other people choosing to relate to the land or find ways to learn or observe?
I'll jump in here, Ian. First, I have a question. Are you familiar with Aldo Leopold?
Yeah, Sand Country Almanac is one of the books I've read.
Yeah, well, he was kind of a pioneer in the thinking that we're talking about here right now in terms of how do you relate to the land. There's some really good stuff in there if anybody hasn't read that, just to kind of give you maybe a philosophical or a mental picture of this idea of how do you relate to the land. That was kind of, he had a lot of epiphanies in his life about, using the old hard methods to do things and then learning how to work with nature. I've been on the farm that I'm on now for about 20 years, so I've got some time here. Yeah, and then I also worked in forest management for 30 years, working and trying to manage, forests that grow for hundreds of years. And I have a background in ecology and a feeling for a holistic approach to whatever I do. So having a piece of land that you own and that you have some objectives for really kind of puts some sideboards on what you're trying to do. But I think my personal opinion is we always need to be thinking in this relationship that you're kind of positing here of, we aren't in control exactly of the land. We have to figure out how to work with it in community. And, my personal experience is the best lucks I've had and over time is finding what what is the least I can do and still get the desirable results. There was a Japanese author named Masanobu Fukuawa that wrote a book called One Straw Revolution, and his was called Do Nothing Farming, where his whole premise was you find out the least you can do and how closely you can work with nature. And that's kind of what you're talking about here, in a sense. And like I say, my best results on the farm have just been kind of watching things. And when the weather's different in a year or something is changed in the year because of factors beyond my control, I just try to work with it. Sometimes you take a hit with pests that you don't really want, but then I've often found that eradicating the pests is worse than living with the pests. Because they provide a lot, like Patty was saying, there's, you get rid of all the bad bugs and your good bugs go away. So you want to have a balance, and, it's really tricky when you have a small diversified farm like I do. We've got, chickens and sheep, and we got annual crops and perennial crops and an orchard. You got agroecology going on here, and it gets really complex, and you're never going to figure it all out. But the more you sit on your land and think about what's going on, the better you'll do, and probably the happier you'll be. That's kind of my philosophy about all this. And I really appreciate that you guys are, taking the same approach, basically.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot about also, people that don't even own land, that, that's for something that comes up in conversation too, of just, the younger generation, say college graduate age, and even high school graduate age, and, the likelihood of them purchasing land is really challenging right now. But we all probably have family members, that maybe own a home or something somewhere, or there's a park that we relate to. And yeah, so, something that your discussion, Steve, is, if we are given this opportunity to own land, how do we choose to relate to it? And by doing that, can we share that story with others that maybe don't own the land? Are there ways to open that relationship up more? And for us, we move the herd to a lot of different properties, but and then we do an internship program through Wolfing. It's called Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. So that's something I hope for all of us is, like, what are ways that we can, like you, for instance, Steve, what are ways that you can share what you're doing with maybe people, with others that don't own land? Because it's a huge gift to have that ability to sit on a piece of land. Yeah. So is there anyone else that's making choices to relate to the land intentionally?
I'll go ahead and share, as kind of the young person that does not have access to land, as I decided to get a community garden plot this summer for the first time, and finding that as the experience of, like, this very small piece of land, and connecting to that and having those moments to slow down. But I also, as part of that, found a lot of value in, like, relating to everyone else that also had a community garden plot, and learning, because so many of them had such, like, a storied experience at that plot, had been there for like 15 years or so, and, like, their connection to the land, and getting to see that, and, like, their practice and their own wisdom that they could share. So that I felt was, like, unexpected, but a real joy in being a part of that.
Where are you located, Madison?
I'm in Bozeman.
Okay. And where's the community garden at?
It's at Westlake Park. It's known for being where the BMX bike park is. So it's bikeable, walkable from where I am too, but it's just kind of right in the downtown area.
Yeah, we have there's a little community garden in Red Lodge that's by our brewery. But it's always, we graze the property around it with the goats, and it's always intrigued me because it's like this really narrow rectangle. But yeah, there's this like you mentioned a BMX park, there's this whole hillside next to it that is just vacant. And yeah, so it's something we've been kind of, my wife and I have been thinking about more is, is there ways that we could expand these community garden plots, and have it as a tool to help manage a piece of land versus, people that don't own land just being limited to like a little square. I mean, anybody seen any examples of larger community garden projects?
Helena has a number of community gardens spread all over the city. I think most of those are not on City of Helena property, although there's at least one I think that's in a city park property, but mainly on churches and other nonprofits.
I was gonna say, I know Bozeman, I think most of them are city property, but they're all kind of contained around downtown, but there's not one single like very large community garden. They're all kind of placed across town.
Great Falls has a very successful, pretty large one, and I visit there a couple times a year or more often and try to offer free education to them to help them. It's always interesting because the people change. It isn't like it's always the same people. There's a few same people, but and so yeah, there's a lot of education that needs to take place for sure. I know of a large ranch that is doing it, that they are bigger than they have cattle for or want to own cattle for, and so they invite younger ranchers in and let them run their cattle on their place. So the younger rancher only has to worry about taking care of them in the winter and the facilities and stuff. So it's really cool.
Yeah, well, the whole community garden concept, I wonder where that started originally, because I think like you mentioned like a larger ranch patty that is allowing other people to come in and graze and work with that. It's something that we've been, my wife and I also been talking about, is just there's forms of gardening that don't necessarily involve just growing vegetables. There's wild harvesting, medicinal and edible plants. There's there's a book called The Art and Science of Shepherding. And it talks a lot about, in France, how they use herds to maintain these open landscapes in the Alps. And like Switzerland's kind of famous for walking the cows down out of the mountains. But just finding examples of places that value that cultural connection to grazing or growing food while also maintaining our land. And yeah, so that is something we're trying to figure out, how can we incorporate more young people and wanting to, for instance, move a herd of animals around, and also come out of it with feeling happy versus feeling angry. and yeah, so I you know, just kind of continue the conversation here. You know, yeah, how do people view the cattle when they're on the other side of the fence when they're driving down a road? Because there's a lot of cattle in this state. And maybe that's
Well,
too
in
general a
our
conversation.
area- Yeah, in our area, we've got cattle and there's a goat producer right outside of town. And so on certain days, they're going to be in the bar ditch because that's where the best green grass is. Unfortunately, in this drought, it's the only thing left that has any nutrition, and it is in the bar ditch at this point, unfortunately. And so, yeah, I think as long as they stay out of the highway, most people don't get too concerned. But if they are worried about them, they usually call the sheriff and they call the owner. But yeah.
I think you're muted, Ivan.
You're muted.
All right, I'm unmuted. How do you keep your goats safe when they're grazing someone else's property? Also, do you get requests to manage weeds that goats don't like, or weeds like mullein that really aren't much of a weed? Yeah, good questions. Well, we have livestock guardian dogs. We have 2 that live with the goats at all times. So that's a huge part of how they're being protected. And then we also use a lot of portable electric netting, which is a big deterrent for predators. And we have grazed like in there's a subdivision just outside of town. It's like 40 acres and a house, and our dogs were barking one night. So some of the landowners were losing sleep over it, so we decided, all right, we'll pull the guard dogs out. And the next day I was walking with the herd, and there was all I found was a goat ear with a little plastic tag on it. And so we thought, oh, well, geez, there's something that came in here in the night. So we brought all the goats back and had them right next to the RV and a little electric fence. And we didn't think anything would mess with it. We didn't have time to get the guard dogs. And the next morning, we didn't hear a single sound. There was a goat dead on the side of the electric fence. And we thought, oh, geez, what the heck happened? Must have caught itself in the fence. And we went over there, and it just had 2 puncture marks on its throat. And so a mountain lion had jumped in the night, killed a goat, and dragged it, and then got shocked by the fence and left it. So I'm just sharing that story in the sense of like, we live in a landscape with predators. So predators are everywhere, is what we're learning. And so we've really tried to take the approach of, the guard dogs and the electric fence and our human presence like deters predators enough that they've become a non-issue. So that's answering the first question. And yeah, there's mullein is an example that goats don't really like eating mullein. I've had there's one landowner that I can think of that she has this mullein all up on her driveway, and she said every time she drives home, the mullein reminds her of a middle finger sticking out of the ground. And so I thought about that. I was like, geez, that's pretty harsh to be driving home every day and see this plant that looks like a middle finger pointing at you. So we actually went in that case and chopped it all down, by hand. And in the process, started actually gathering the leaves, and then, looked up mullein and learned that, it's a really good medicine for sinus and congestion. And it was interesting because that same lady, she was dealing with a lot of allergies. She's allergic to a lot of plants, and so that mullein, potentially was, her own medicine right there by her driveway. But yeah, so there are some plants that the goats aren't too keen on, and in those situations I try, is it something we can use our own hands for, or do we concentrate? Sometimes we concentrate the animals, like really bunch them up, and then you can trample plants and lay it down as mulch to help incorporate in the soil. So really anymore, I try not to view anything as a bad plant, but it's a lot of it's just trying to understand why the heck is that plant growing there in the first place. And it's amazing, like mullein can grow on an eroded slope with barren rock. And so those are, I think each of these plants has so much potential to teach us something. Any success in controlling cheatgrass with grazing? Cheatgrass is a bane in my life. Yeah, I've that's from Mark. Yeah, cheatgrass comes up a lot too, because in our area, like especially south facing slopes that are really, really hot and dry, and if they've been sprayed with herbicides a lot, usually cheatgrass comes in. So if you notice with cheatgrass, it's a cool season grass, so it comes in real early in the spring and greens up. And the most success we've had with it, and this has also been a success with other plants, is taking an opportunity in the wintertime, if you have the ability, to bring in some outside feed. So some hay maybe that has alfalfa grass mix, has a little bit of diversity in it, and then roll feeding out on these areas that have a lot of cheatgrass. And what we found is just through that simple act of like winter grazing and feeding out, it helps build up some soil armor and some litter, and then the poop and the pee that actually helps activate the soil to get out of the little funk it's in with cheatgrass. And we found over time that works really well, is just seeing it as an opportunity to winter feed on that ground. It's almost like the cheatgrass is saying, like, hey, my roots are really shallow, and like you need to cover me more with something so that I can so that other plants can grow. So yeah, that's been our main success, is changing how we view it, like seeing it as an opportunity to work with that cheatgrass in the winter. But if you don't have access to animals, it's an opportunity to build a relationship with somebody, and see their hay as a soil amendment.
I was at a soil crawl this summer at the Land of Grass, I believe it is, up there in out of by Conrad. And she had just dumped cow manure from the pins out onto the cheatgrass patches. And the following year, the cheatgrass was gone and native grasses were starting to come up and come through just from changing that, get what you say, the thatch on there, and some changing the microbes and everything, and just gets a different response. And then the native plants came through. She did the same thing with bale grazing, and even just straw rolled out where they didn't even graze it or anything. They just rolled straw out for some winter protection, and the sheep didn't use it. enough, that straw was still really deep. I bet we dug through probably 6 to 10 inches of straw, and underneath that it was, we're in this major drought, but underneath that it was cool and damp, and native grasses were sprouting in that straw. So it was pretty amazing, when it had been solid cheap.
Yeah, thanks, Patty. I mean, straw is another. I mean, again, it's amazing that that simple act of spreading manure, spreading more litter.
We might have lost Ivan.
That's what it looks like.
Everybody else is seeing the same thing.
Yeah, he froze up.
Rural Montana internet.
I'll pick up a little bit on what he was just saying, just to share a little more information. In the arid West, the weed problems that we have nowadays it's not something that's, it's not necessarily, it's got a history to it, is what I'm trying to get at here, is overgrazing. And a lot of places, unfortunately, are still being overgrazed, are actually favoring the weeds instead of the native plants. And yeah, so there's Ian back.
Yeah, sorry, my internet did.
Yeah,
Ian, was there questions, Steve, or?
No, I was trying, with I guess where you cut out was on the weed issue and the cheatgrass issue, and I was just relating how the historic overgrazing is what brought cheat in. There's a whole chapter in the Sand County Almanac on cheat taking over in the Northwest back in the 1800s, and overgrazing was the historic problem, and today there's still a lot of areas that people don't leave enough live plants, and sometimes these weeds are just pioneers trying to take advantage of a vacuum, and they're better than nothing in a lot of cases because they're creating more microbiota and organic matter. So a lot of the tactics you're talking about where mulching, I do a lot of mulching. I love it. There's a lot of ways to do it. There's a lot of, you can have issues with bringing in the wrong seed that you don't want, but if you just kind of do some intelligent tinkering with your mulching, you can change that soil, the soil micro, the profile. And so there's a lot of nuances. One orchardist I work with, it always talks about the nuances of what you do. Like in one case, something works. In another case, you don't want to do that because it'll have a negative effect. But you have to know when, timing, and a lot of things. And you can only do it if you're just a student of what you're trying to do on your land. And I do mentor. I do lease my land to younger farmers. So that's, I am trying to share and get people an opportunity to learn this land ethic. Yeah. So yeah, this is more good stuff to think about. And I think Arrow's been great about promoting this over the years that I've been involved.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. No, I also appreciate all the educational material that Arrow provides, and I think what's neat is we all have something that we've learned, and it's amazing how simple it can be to share it sometimes. And yeah, my wife right now is involved in a group called Women in Ranching, and it's mostly focused on women that are involved in ranching throughout the West. And what I've really seen in all these gatherings where we can bring people together is just how it helps uplift each one of us by hearing other people's stories and by sharing our own story and finding ways to relate. And I think, whether it's cheatgrass or knapweed or earthworms or carrots, we're all trying to figure out how we want to relate with these other living entities that are in our home. And yeah, and so something I just want to challenge the group is just, maybe this winter, think about try to learn a different plant or find access to some different seeds that maybe you can try to rake into an area or spread, and see if you can germinate something new in your life. Because I find that it's really exciting in the springtime to learn about a new plant that you maybe helped germinate by planting its seed. So I think that's something we'll have access to. There in our area, there's like North 40 Ag that in Ballantyne, they're a cover crop seed distributor. There's wild harvesting seeds yourself, and then trying to spread those in a new area. And yeah, I just wanted to ask. I was looking at you here, Patty. Patty, do you save seeds?
Yeah, I'm an amateur at it. Robin's been teaching me. But this year I made a goal and got more into it, mostly because I finally felt like I had gotten high enough plant health and quality to start trying to save some. And so I'll be sorting them pretty hard, those seeds that I saved, and sorting out the biggest, fattest, thickest, heaviest seeds. And those are the only ones that I'm going to plant to propagate for the next generation of plants. I kind of using my cattle genetic selection thinking with these plants. And so that's what I'm going to try to attempt this year. So that's pretty interesting. I will tell. It'll be quicker than the cattle on the cattle genetics, we make a decision and maybe we buy a bull and 5 years later we find out if he was good or not. I hope.
Yeah. Well, I'm amazed. We'll be grazing a property and we'll go up on the top of a hill and you'll find maybe a single leafy spurge or a single thistle plant. I think, well, how the heck did that seed get up there? And it made me actually want to start collecting some bird poop and trying to see what seeds are in there that can germinate. And so I just bring up that that observation of just these some of these seeds are so resilient that they can pass through a bird, pass through a cow, pass through a horse, that are growing without us even handling them ourselves. So yeah, so maybe it's as simple as collecting some bird poop wherever you live and trying to see if it germinates anything. It's as strange as that sounds.
I did do an experiment on weeds though, and so I took the bane of our life over here, which is bindweed, and seeped it in water and made a weed tea out of it. And I think that's going to prove to be pretty exciting. What I have done so far was just jaw-dropping in this drought, and so I think we'll get a lot deeper into that. So if you've got a plant you just really, really don't like, then you might be able to turn it into a really good thing by getting the biology out of it and whatever minerals was in it, and put it back onto the ground, to get back and see what happens. And it was amazing how much the grasses grew that I put that weed juice on. I put it on a bindweed patch, but it was full of brome grass, and the brome grass in this drought, we hadn't had at the time when I noticed how green this patch was getting. We hadn't had an inch of rain yet, and it was June or late June, and it was green and 6 inches taller than everything else around it. And I'm like, what in the world? This is like crazy. And so I even dug down in the plant litter, and it was cool and damp under there. And it was at the landfill or the dump, you know, and so it was just hard packed gravel pack that they build roads out of. So it really wasn't even soil where these plants are growing. And so it's just like, wow. We've got a lot of things that we could do and learn and pay attention to and maybe help out just a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Patty, you just fermented the bindweed in a barrel for for how long?
Anytime you want. Let's see. Mute.
You're unmuted. Oh, there you go.
Okay. Yep. So I did it several different ways. About a week into the water, the plant's breaking down really well. But if the plant had seed in it, you know, that seed is super, super hard. I'd leave it in there a month or longer to make sure that that seed really couldn't possibly grow. And I've had some that I didn't even put in water. I just put it in a barrel and it turned into this black goo. And I think I'm supposed to use that more like a herbicide. And I haven't attempted to use that yet, but I've got the black goo made. So this year coming up, I guess, to be another experiment. But it's pretty amazing. You know, I put comfrey, I grow comfrey for that purpose, and then had access to some nettles this year. And so those steeped even for 3 days and put back out is incredible results. So, and you could dilute it dramatically. A lot of stuff for a little bit of plant material. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, thanks, Patty. Hey, and that's a real simple thing, you know, you can do when you're pulling weeds from your garden or anywhere. Just try to collect them in a container and ferment it a little bit, and that's you know, it's interesting because like you know, the whole philosophy of the goat is when they eat certain plants, they're digesting it and then they're making those minerals available in their poop and pee. But I think when you're doing it in a barrel, you're really concentrating that one specific plant. So yeah, it's more exciting than a Dow chemical.
You know, something along these lines for everybody to think about. Maybe Arrow would be a good project for Arrow at some point. You guys on the board, but I belong to a holistic orchard network. That's an online network of what we're just like people like us talking about cheatgrass and field bindweed. It covers it's really well set up, and you can go into the website, and if you're a member, you can query and you share these kind of ideas online. You just it's always there, and there's always people contributing, and it's across the whole country, and everybody lists where they're at and what their climate is. It's a huge resource for me in my orchard work. Something like that could be done more regionally, bioregionally or something, or just a Montana network of back, you know, people on the land that are sharing. You get some of the same kind of stuff from the Extension Service, and you know, and a lot of good information there. But it's kind of more personable when you're actually interacting with other growers or other orchardists or whatever.
Yeah, does Arrow have a resource like similar to that in any way?
So my understanding, I wasn't here, but my understanding is in their history, they had farm improvement clubs where folks would get together and discuss ideas for, you know, things to experiment with and so on. We also had an ag task force and an energy task force, each of which still have email lists served where people occasionally share things, and that could probably be something that, you know, could be bootstrapped into that kind of discussion as well.
Yeah, Mark, I think the old farm improvement clubs died because of distance, and people, it was a lot harder to communicate to 25, 30 years ago. And only with the internet capabilities or current kind of things could that be brought back at with the same objective that they had. Yeah, I forgot about that, but yeah, that was a big deal back 30 years ago.
Zoom allows a lot of things. You can, or methods like Zoom. You can get really burned out on it, but it sure does facilitate people getting together from it, across the entire state. We do need the rural broadband to make that possible.
Ivan, this is changing the topic completely, but what kind of dung beetles have you got?
Yeah, dung beetles is another exciting thing we've gotten into. Well, last we counted, it was in one of the, we have some cows too, just a little group, and I like to flip over their pies a little bit, and then I counted. If I was identifying correctly, I counted five different type of insect in there, and as Patty kind of knows it, when we first started, I'll say like 2009, 2010, there was, as far as I could tell, there was no dung beetles of any kind like on this property, and so we got gifted some from John Brown from Steve Charter's ranch, and then Vern Smith over in Paradise Valley, and then they really spread. So yeah, that's another exciting thing. And goat poop has them too, but what I'm learning is you have to be way more observant to like actually see them in the little goat turd. So Patty's bringing up another exciting thing of just, yeah, if you stumble across dung beetles, spread them. Like if you're in an area that doesn't have them, and they're another great way to help out the land.
Yeah, and I did quite a bit of research on them, and I'm doing a dung beetle presentation here soon. But anyhow, with Dr. Hayes Busey, who's our expert in the state on the dung beetles and stuff. But it's just exciting to see what can happen with them. And they travel 30 miles. So if we could kind of start building some clean animals to be able to have them kind of build some corridors to travel on and live on and stuff would really, really help a lot of area of the state versus just one ranch or whatever. But yeah, it's exciting stuff.
Yeah, and when Patty says clean, I mean that means animals that aren't being dewormed, and that brings up we don't deworm any of our animals. We really into the philosophy of like animals will self medicate if they're given the ability to. So if you give them access to plant diversity, they'll choose the medicine that they need. And, it also ties into that concept of rest and recovery. Like parasites have a certain life stage. And if you can move the animals enough where they're not just in that same piece of ground, that helps minimize the need for any kind of parasite control. But those are just other dung beetle related things. Yeah, and Coulter was sharing with me. You're living in a yurt up there, and my wife and I we actually started off living in a Mongolian yurt for 7 winters. You can kind of see behind me where the house we're in. We're still we tore down my great grandparents' place, and we've been building a house in the same spot. But yeah, I was just wondering, Coulter, if you've been learning anything about living in that round space versus a square space.
Yeah, we're not in it all the way yet. We've got the exterior structure up, and we're bringing utilities adjacent now, but we're not all the way in yet. We still got to get the wood stove and stuff kind of settled, but we've been doing a lot of construction in the yurt, and living in a round space is interesting because as you're trying to build like a bedroom for your kid, it's sort of like, how do you take a round shape and put a rectilinear room in it? Not that we want it to be that way, but like the beds are squares and like the furniture are squares, and so you either end up with like a pie shaped room that nothing fits in, or you end up with weird hallways and whatnot. So we've been tinkering around with that, and that's been coming along. And also trying to put the floor in. My wife luckily is a genius in the visual arts, and has been doing the floor, which in a round space is just really hard. And I looked at it for a long time and was like, yeah, this is impossible. I'm gonna go do something else. So she's come back and finished the floor. The floor is pretty much done now. So that's great. And yeah, so it's been interesting. And also we did get a larger-ish yurt. I mean, it's a 30-foot diameter, so we're 700 square feet. But when you tell people you live in a 700 square foot house, that's small by, you know, modern American standards. And we just see, you know, when you think through what you actually need and what you actually want, like 700 square feet's a lot. Like we don't need bigger bedrooms. We don't need more living space. And so it's been exciting, and it's been cool that we've done almost all the construction on our own. We had some struggles with wind blowing our roof off twice. That's what happens when you live in Livingston. But so other than that, though, it's been really a good project. Hoping to be in by Thanksgiving.
I guess I'm kind of been observing where people plant their homes and how that's changed over time. The house that my brothers and sister and I grew up in was built like in 1940 down in a coulee, where it was protected from the wind and close to water and so on. And then when my parents bought a house or built a house maybe 10 years or so ago, they built up on the hill, and you know, and now they're dealing, you know, they were dealing then with wind, and you know, the heating load was higher, and you had to move water farther and stuff, and so there's a lot to be said for that, you know, the observational skills of, you know, siting a house just like you would site anything else.
Yeah, and we're kind of in the middle of the hillside, so our hillside kind of comes down, flattens out a little bit, and then goes real steep down again. And so we're on that. It's not flat, but it's flatter. And there's like a spring there, so there's water, and we're protected from wind in a couple directions, but not all of them. But all the big new houses that are going up around us, because Livingston's really in a big development stage, they're right on the very tippy top of the ridges. So they get the best view, which is great, but they also just get absolutely hammered by the wind. And I don't know how they get up there in the winter, because the drifts are so bad when it's so windy. And it's funny because, you know, the area we live in is a really old part of Livingston. It's Cokedale. It's where all the coke was made to push the trains over the Bozeman Pass. So this area was as big as Livingston proper back in the day. And all the old houses are tucked in the valleys. Where the trees are, there's houses. Where there's not trees, there's no old houses, except now there's new houses. And so we're sort of in the middle of a slope, and we figured that was sort of the most protected we could afford, because we have 21 acres, so we don't have an unlimited variety of space. But you know, we're trying to bring the trees here, which is some of the seeds that we're saving. Is when we go to the store, we buy organic local apples from Montana, and I'm just sticking them in the ground, and I'm hoping something will come up, because we need to get some trees going. And you know, I've been stealing some pine trees from out and about, but trying to help transition a bit of the land to that around us, to try to create what is around the older houses, since we do have this water resource here. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Coulter. Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's an interesting way to meet digitally here. I always prefer in person, but yeah, it's an honor just to even share a little bit of our story and hear other people's stories. Yeah, and you know, makes me have hope for this community of, you know, the people and plants that we live in.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that. It would be much better to be in person, but I think, you know, given where everything is this year, it's still probably where we are. But hopefully next year we'll be back to in person and things will be more normal. But I'll say that for myself, I've found these, especially the collaborative communications, to be very just inspiring. And I won't lie, sometimes it gets a little lonely out here in the middle of nowhere. So it's nice to meet, even if it's virtually, and just hear other people's stories and successes, especially, you know, when sometimes you're struggling, to have them on your own. So anyways, I really appreciate everybody's input and just the overall positive energy of this call.
Definitely.
Yeah, I can hardly wait till Eero meets it live and we have another auction.
All right, I think we're going to call it, and I just want to say thanks again to Ivan for coming and hosting and, you know, sparking such thoughtful conversation amongst everybody. It was great. I really had a nice time.